Hi, everyone. We will get started here shortly. Okay, well, good evening, everyone. I'm Laureen Boll, State Coordinator for FAIR Colorado, and my fellow leader, Tiffany Howell, is also joining the call tonight. And before I introduce our speakers for this webinar, where we'll discuss the legislative session that ended last month in Colorado, I do want to explain why FAIR, as a nonpartisan grassroots organization, is facilitating this webinar. FAIR is committed to challenging threats to civil liberties from identity-based practices. And our core aim is to protect and defend freedom of speech and equal protection rights that are guaranteed by the First and 14th Amendments. We're also fierce defenders of objective truths. Unfortunately, the Colorado legislature has a growing track record over the last 5 years of passing laws that grant special rights to particular identity groups, which is a form of discrimination. Parental authority, which courts have interpreted to be protected under the 14th Amendment, is being usurped by government agencies. And speech is being compelled in the name of protecting individuals who identify as transgender. So, with us tonight are fellow Coloradans who, like FAIR, have concerns about the trajectory of Colorado's legislature. And they'll be referencing a summary of 6 bills during our discussion, which was included in the email reminder of tonight's webinar. No worries if you don't have that summary. We'll post it in our chat, and we'll also post it on our Substack, which is faircolorado.substack.com. So I will now introduce our esteemed speakers. James Kerwin is a senior counsel at Mountain States Legal Foundation, where he runs the foundation's First Amendment free speech practice. James earned his law degree from the University of California, Berkeley School of Law, and after clerkships with the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit and the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of New York, he built a career litigating high-stakes commercial disputes and civil rights cases in New York City. He came out west and joined Mountain States Legal Foundation to stand against the capture of vital sense-making institutions by radical activists. You came to the right spot. Dr. Travis Morrell is a dad, husband, and physician, a lifelong learner to a fault, his postgraduate medical training in 5 specialty departments, and medical leadership gives him a broad perspective of his profession. He is published in the top journals of multiple fields and in popular media. Dr. Morrell is a senior fellow at Do No Harm Medicine, and he's chair of Colorado Principled Physicians, a grassroots organization of physicians promoting evidence-based medicine and classical liberal values. Find him on X at at Morrell MD MPH, and we'll put this stuff in the chat as well. Brandy Bradley is a mom of 4 boys, a physical therapist, and was elected to Colorado's House of Representatives in 2022. During her tenure as a House representative, Brandy has been laser focused on safeguarding parental rights and protecting children from sexual predators and the harms of gender ideology. Brandy has been pivotal in alerting all Coloradans to the ideological capture of Colorado's legislature via her X account, which is at Bradley for CO, which has nearly 10,000 followers. And finally, Kevin Lundberg. Kevin will kick off our discussion tonight with a short synopsis of his background and a narrative of how Colorado got to this point of being run by an ideologically motivated government. So, Kevin, can I turn it over to you?
Okay, that sounds good. I served in the legislature until term limits ended that. I was in the House and in the Senate, some total of 16 years, and been politically active in tracking things since then. Um, but yeah, how did Colorado get here in the first place? Because I'm a Colorado native, and when when I grew up, it was we didn't have the red and blue designations, but Colorado was definitely a conservative state with conservative values, and freedom was a high priority. Regulations were at a minimum, um, but when I entered the legislature, and you know oftentimes things take a bit of a partisan angle, and definitely it does on the liberal conservative side, on the freedom, on the regulatory. ends of the spectrum. I'm a Republican. And when I entered the legislature back in 2003, we controlled the House, the Senate, and the governor's office. Um, I'm not going to tell you we did things perfectly. I felt like often I was in the conservative minority of the majority party quite often, but nonetheless, we held the reins and held government at bay, really. Um, but then in 2004, the election of 2004, the 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 tables were turned. We still had a Republican governor for 2 more years, but the left won back the House and the Senate, and uh, there was a book that was written called The Blueprint, which shows how they literally threw 10 times as much money towards House races and Senate races than we were accustomed to. And I contend that the people of Colorado have not changed so much as the politics of it, because of very shrewd manipulation of how people get elected. And so in the 16 years I was in the legislature, and that wrapped up in 2018, 6 of those years I was in the majority, 10 of those years I was in the minority. So I learned about it from both directions. And since I got out, the past 6 years, it seems to be on steroids as far as rushing over to control everything, to raise taxes, to increase fees, to promote radical ideologies, and so much of it is at the expense of our freedoms. Well, virtually all of it is, really. This year was a capstone to that, if you will. 1312 was the big battle that many of us fought again and again, and it was amended several times, and we'll get into that bill, I'm pretty sure, a little more detail, but I want to make one thing clear: they didn't fix it. It's, I think, probably worse now than when it started, even though it's not as obvious. But that's what we've seen. If you're a lover of liberty, is pretty depressing down at the Capitol, and Brandy will probably get into that a little bit too. So hopefully that helps
Yep.
at least lay some of the groundwork as to how we got here.
Yes. Yes. And the book, the Blueprint, was also, there's a parallel movie made of that. I can't
Right.
recall the title,
Um,
but people should look for that as well.
yeah, I think it was the
Um,
Rocky Mountain Heist. If
the
I,
Rocky Mountain Heist.
yeah,
Yes. And
and
I love your terminology, Kevin. It was a shrewd manipulation
yeah,
that took place.
yeah,
So,
and that's an important principle, because I haven't given up on Colorado. Not the people of Colorado. The current political leadership, yes, but I think the tide is turning too. So I'm actually kind of upbeat right now.
awesome. Glad to hear that. Well, you did mention House Bill 1312, which is legal protections for transgender individuals. And I would like to start our dissection of the bills that we've laid out with that particular one. It garnered a lot of national attention, and it even made it to the news in Australia. And it was, I think the general public was aghast at the first rendition of this bill. So, Kevin, would you mind continuing on your with your expertise of what did 1312 start out with? And
Well,
I think we should also clearly articulate where it ended, because there, unfortunately, I think some of the media said, "Oh, it's not so bad anymore."
right, right. Um, it's a bit of a complex bill, really, and it had to do with trying to force the accommodation of the transgender ideology onto every citizen in the state of Colorado. And it started in Section 1 of the original language in the bill, talking about custody issues for parents. And it essentially said that if a parent doesn't adhere to a child's preferred name, then that really throws a big question mark as to whether that parent should have custody of that child. And it appeared to be, on first reading, just dealing with messy divorces, if you will. But if you think a little bit deeper into this, anytime there's any call to child protective services for some concern, well, if you come before a judge and the law says, and that it's a transgender issue, and the law says that it's a discrimination against that child if the parent is not affirming of that that choice. And you know, let me clear one other thing up too. A 12-year-old child generally, probably almost exclusively, does not make decisions on their own. They're following the guidance and the direction of either their peers or some authority figure. And if you take the parents out, well, you're left with whatever wherever that child is. So when I talk about the chosen name, I really call it more the assigned name by the people that influence that child. Because remember, we're talking about children. We're not talking about adults. Anyway, that was the first part of the bill. And then, Brandy, you may want to help me on this, or really anybody on the panel here, that it got into how schools and were to handle the transgender issues within their ranks, and it dealt with the changing the Colorado or adding to the anti-discrimination laws the specific concept of a transgender name. Well, actually, they didn't say transgender; they just said chosen name. But everybody knows the code words here. And with that is not only their name, but their pronoun. And all of that folded into, dare I say it, a big, bad, ugly bill that was meant to force feed the gender ideology to everyone in the state of Colorado. Businesses, schools, individuals, families, you name it, it covers the entire gamut when they put it in the anti-discrimination laws.
Right, right. So, Brandy, are you in a good spot? It looks like you're in a car, but can you opine on kind of how the bill ended up in being
Can you
signed
hear
into
me
law?
okay?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. I tried to take off my video so that I could get better reception. So yes, Kevin has it completely right. We added chosen name under gender expression and put that into the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act. So the media is reporting that this is a very tame bill, but what they're not reporting is that this doesn't just affect the schools, it affects the business community, it affects the private school community, it affects churches, because when churches open up their community to funerals, weddings, the vacation Bible schools that you see going on all over Colorado right now, Attarahaji is a perfect example. They're having to sue the state right now because the state is telling them that boys can shower with little girls or sleep in the same room with little girls. The business community, if they dead name or misgender. And so a lot of people don't understand what dead naming. I just want to tell your viewers that if they don't understand what that means, if somebody wants to be called Samantha, but their biological name is Sam, if you do not call them Samantha, that is considered dead naming. And under this bill, that codifies dead naming them. So in the previous bill, it was, I think, spoken if you do it 3 times. Now there's no guardrail to how many times that you do that, that is going to be against the law. So it's a free-for-all type of bill, and the business community should be very scared of it. Churches should be very scared of it. Really, in the state that, you know, work or have, that's why we're seeing 3 different lawsuits already.
Yeah. All right. Thanks, Brandy. And you're breaking up a little bit, so I'm gonna go over to.
I wonder if I could build on that just a little bit on a couple of points.
Sure, and then we'll have James weigh in on kind of the
please.
constitutionality.
I just wanted to note that Brandy brought up the term dead naming, which is something they wanted to put in the law, that particular word. And, you know, that's just a loaded word with a lot of pejorative overtones to it. And I'd like to rename that. And I'd like to say, as opposed to birth naming, because that's really what you're doing, is you're calling somebody by their actual name that they were given at birth. Generally, I mean, if they chose to change their name for other reasons, then that's something else. But this terminology is just way over the top, and they put that in. And Brandy is, you know, absolutely correct that well, when the bill came up for public testimony, 700 people showed up, and there was a handful who were for the bill, but almost everybody was against it. And out of that, they backed off and changed, you know, dropped the word dead naming and turned it into chosen name. But the same principle applies, and it still applies to parents, because if a parent refuses to acquiesce to this principle, then it's the same effect as the original bill, as every form of the bill. They didn't change it, they just added to it and made it worse.
So, James, you're our constitutional expert, well, specifically the First Amendment, and you've had an opportunity to review this bill through that lens. And also, as Brandy mentioned, there are already 2 lawsuits that have been filed against the state in reaction to this bill.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to chat with folks here. I find this really fascinating, though I imagine members of the audience are more concerned with how this might affect them personally than with the legal ins and outs. I did want to level set just a little bit. I agree that there's been a lot of confusing news headlines on this, so I'll maybe strike a slightly different tone. Definitely there are things that underplay the importance of this, but there are also some things that maybe make it sound like this bill does go a little further than it really does. Now, let's give you a scenario. You get up tomorrow morning, you're walking down the street and you see somebody, you say, good day, ma'am, it's a beautiful day. And that person says, well, thanks for the well wishes, but I was born a woman, but I've actually transitioned, please call me sir. And you decide to continue to call them ma'am. You haven't violated the law. People ought to be aware of that, because you're not a public accommodation, nor are you in an employment relationship with this person or in the market for housing, which are the 3 areas where the Colorado anti-discrimination law applies. And that is, so that's the good news, but it's pretty slim because those 3 areas are, in fact, a good chunk of what people do in their lives. You go to work every day, so you're at an employee setting where this law does apply. You may be a business owner, you may work in a business that's open to the public. And as Brandy mentioned, the public accommodation piece of this is pretty broad. It's sort of, people think about public accommodation anti-discrimination laws as applying to businesses open to the public. I mean, Joe's Burgers is out there, and the law says that Joe can't discriminate in selling his burgers on the basis of a lot of different protected characteristics. But it also applies to educational institutions. Weirdly, there's a lot of things in the law that are very specific: a bathhouse, a campsite or trailer camp, clinics and hospitals, that sort of thing. So a lot of places where people spend a lot of their time are covered by this law. So what does the law do? To back up just a minute, people will be familiar with the general idea of an anti-discrimination law. I think every state has them, and the federal government has one, that especially the 1964 Civil Rights Act is the most prominent one. They started as efforts to protect what used to be called discrete and insular minorities from private discrimination for the most part. So we're not talking about government discriminating against people on the basis of race, for example. We're talking about a private business, which in the absence of a law would be free to do whatever it wanted to. But so they started out with good intentions, and the laws use verbs like "you shall not deny or refuse to serve people because they belong to a protected group." And that's still what the law says. Over time, different groups have been added for protection. Most recently in 2014, the Colorado law was amended to include gender identity and gender expression. But at the time that happened, there have been First Amendment problems with the way Colorado applied its law, but at least with respect to the core provision, it wasn't so obvious on the face of it that mostly what this law did was just, prevent somebody from at Bob's Burgers from saying, $1 burgers for everybody unless you're Irish, and then it's $2, that kind of thing. Or, it would also have just prevented discrimination on the basis of gender expression, which meant, until just recently, it meant the way somebody showed what they thought about internally in terms of what their gender was. And the law specifically said dress and conduct, right? So it has been since 2014 illegal for Bob's Burgers to say, you may come in here and buy a burger from me unless you are wearing clothes that don't belong to your sex, right? That's been illegal, and that continues to be illegal. But it was legal for Bob to sell you the burger, right? That he wasn't violating the law if he provided the services that were available to the public, notwithstanding whatever he might have thought about the way you dressed. The change of the law is pretty incredible because now what it does is it's redefined, or it's added to the definition of gender expression two things. One is now gender expression includes legally chosen means of address, which means pronouns and honorifics and things like that. So and also chosen names. So what that means is for Bob's Burgers, if somebody comes into Bob's Burgers and says, "I would like to buy a hamburger," and Bob sells them the hamburger, and the person also says, "By the way, refer to me as she," but Bob says, I respect your right to live your life any way that you choose, but I don't believe in saying something that I believe is false, and I think referring to you as she is saying something that's false. Bob has nevertheless violated the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act, even though the goods and services Bob was putting out to the public have been made freely available to this individual. The reason I go into this detail is because it puts a fine point on the idea that the new law targets speech and speech only, because that's the only change. Before the change to the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act, what mattered was whether that person got the burger. Now it doesn't matter. I mean, it still matters because if you deny the burger, you're still violating the law, but you can violate the law even if you invite the person into your business, treat them on the same terms as anybody else, but you just don't say certain words. So it's the words that matter. And given that, it obviously implicates First Amendment issues. And another reason why I say that, there have been 2 lawsuits that have been filed already challenging this. I think one of our panel members, Dr. Morell, is a plaintiff for one of them, so I doubt that he will be at liberty to say anything about it. But I think as a neutral
and Kevin Lundberg too.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Right. I'm chairman of the board for Protect Kids Colorado, which works at putting initiatives on the ballot concerning these areas. And our legal counsel has told us that you'd better abide by that law until we get it changed. So yeah, I find that it's affecting us directly and unfairly, unconstitutionally.
Yeah.
Yes, I would tend to agree with you. I'll keep it short, but I'll just say, to the extent people are interested in the legal ins and outs, the issues that are going to be litigated, and the state has not yet filed anything, so there's nothing yet for a judge to decide. But the issues that are going to be litigated, what the state will say is that we're not regulating the speech of Bob at Bob's Burgers. We're regulating conduct. And the conduct is a course of discriminating on the basis of a protected characteristic. And they would say this is just like in the 1960s, if a business said Irish need not apply, I keep using Irish because I feel like I'm pretty safe there as a ton Irish. And what that did in effect, it did two things. Number one, then when the person didn't like hire an Irish person, it was evidence of their intent to discriminate. But also, just by saying that out loud and advertising that sort of thing, it does discourage people from applying in the first place. So it is denying them preemptively the goods and services that are on offer. So one thing the state will say is that it's not speech, it's just conduct, therefore the First Amendment doesn't really apply. And the other thing they might say is, even if it is speech, not all regulations of speech are unconstitutional. If they pass what's called strict scrutiny, they can be lawful anyway. That would require the state to show that there's a compelling governmental interest in requiring everybody to use preferred pronouns. I doubt very highly the state can show that. I think other people on the panel have much better understanding of what the legal research shows about things like gender affirming care. My understanding is that the evidence is definitely mixed, if not against the idea that it's healthy for people to go with a internal gender identity that differs from their sex. In any event, that's sort of the legal overview. I'm happy to answer questions. Come
up. We do have a question about the penalties, the consequences and fines if somebody violates this law. And I know maybe I'm jumping the gun a little bit, but there is a revised, there's a bill that was signed into law, HB 1239, called the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act, which is kind of weird because it's not like this is a new act. But James, I'm assuming this ties then to 1312.
Yeah, that bill modernized the Colorado Anti-Discrimination Act. It's got a few provisions. The most important ones are simply that it increased the monetary penalties for violations of the law. It already, I believe, was a $3,000 fine per violation, and now it's $5,000. I might have those numbers slightly wrong, but it's something along those lines. And when you think about the idea that that's for each violation that's found, right? So if you, if Bob has a policy where his employees should use only sex-based pronouns, and that goes on for a few weeks, or maybe many violations that can really add up pretty quickly. From the point of view of the First Amendment, by the way, it doesn't matter. Like even a $1 fine, if it's targeted at speech and it's not sufficiently justified, in other words, it hasn't passed strict scrutiny, it's still unconstitutional and it would need to go. But yeah, the fact that they've not only added to the things that they're forbidding you from saying, but also increased the penalty to scare you even more and to self-censoring, it's worse.
And isn't there a separate penalty for businesses? Is it $50,000?
There is a new provision that allows the recovery of non-economic damages by somebody who claims that they've been harmed, up to $50,000, I believe. Yes.
Wow. And that too applies to speech. Yes,
it would be any violation of CATA. Again, like to take a step back, these laws, the forerunners of these laws have been around for a long time. They weren't called CATA back then, but some of these are more than a century old. Like they're laws against discriminating on the basis of race or national origin. Good ideas, right? It's that when you run out of victims, maybe you invent new ones and you invent new ways and to control people. I really think it's unfortunately.
And for the last 20 years, the legislature has been piling on to these laws. I think it was back in, I want to say 2006 or so, there was a bill called Senate Bill 200, and that changed 17 different parts of the law dealing with public accommodation and related areas, again, forcing an ideology that not everybody adheres to into the mainstream. That was one that was deemed the bathroom bill by some people back then because it allowed men to go into women's spaces like that. And in my home county here in Larimer County, up in Loveland, it wasn't but a couple of months later that started occurring. So yeah, we've seen a whole chain of actions taken from. I quite agree that there's a place for these laws that really enforce public mores, but when the legislature steps in and says we're going to change those mores by our choice, not by what the the standard accepted values are in the community, then they're going way too far, and they're violating a lot of constitutional rights we have.
All right, let's move along to our next bill, Protect Access to Gender Affirming Healthcare. That was House Bill 1309. It is in effect, I believe it's immediate that it went into effect. Brandy, are you still able to chat?
I can. Just will you let me know if I'm not coming through?
You are coming through loud and clear right now.
Well, perfect. So yes,
Yay!
House Bill 25-1309 provides gender affirming care. So think breast augmentation for men that want to feel more like women, bone remodeling, anything that they want. And I tried to run an amendment to exclude anyone under the age of 18, and it was met with very vile and angry comments because apparently children cannot have the frontal lobe capacity to own guns and ammunition or vote or buy alcohol, but they can decide to have a sex change at the age of 12. And the taxpayers are going to fund this in the state of Colorado because we're going to make private insurers pay for it.
And Medicaid too.
And Medicaid
Right.
as well. Yes. And so, we're in a budget shortfall in our state. Some people say $4 to $5 billion if you take into account certificates that we owe and things that we have done. We spend over $100 million on illegals healthcare. And now we are going to make sure that health insurance premiums skyrocket. And so people like me who do not believe in transitioning, children especially, are going to have to pay for that. And for me, that's a big concern.
Dr. Morrell, you probably have some opinions on this.
Yeah, so 1309 is a pretty interesting bill. You should know that in Colorado, prior to 1309, Medicaid, our state tax-paid insurance that covers kids and adults, already covered puberty blockers at the beginning of puberty, which is age 8 to 13. So young kids already covered puberty blockers, already covered cross-sex hormones, which usually follows after around age 13 or 16 or so. And then already covered surgeries for kids if it was found to be clinically reasonable, which in my experience in other situations usually requires something like a letter from a doctor, which isn't impossible to get. Already in our state, Denver Health has, at least through January, advertised that they do breast amputation or mastectomy on girls for gender reasons at age 16, and it's legal and advertised at other clinics at age 15 in the state. So all this is already kind of covered. What's interesting is 1309 adds, it lists A, B, C, 3, D, E, G, all the way through N. So 14 different procedures or types of procedures that will now be required for all insurance to cover. And that would be Medicaid or tax-paid insurance, as well as your premiums will be going to it if you have private insurance. And these conditions are not what most people would call medically necessary, even if they were doing it for themselves. But this bill 1309 calls these medically necessary. And I am not kidding you. You can Google HB 25-1309 and look this up for yourself. This is things like laser hair removal, breast augmentation or a boob job, or breast reduction, any kind of nose, chin, or face surgery, including the bones, facelift, eyelid lift, basically a lip filler. So all these things that basically all of us agree are cosmetic. If you can get a doctor or behavioral health specialist, which is pretty broad in our state, to say that you need this for your gender dysphoria, which is the kind of formal term for saying you're uncomfortable with your gender presentation in your own body. You're having distress from that. If you have gender dysphoria, all these things become medically necessary. And I'm not a legislator or an attorney, but they did in this bill with the safety clause, which is them saying this is like urgent and needs to be in effect as soon as possible. And to me, that's and to most people that were like, oh boy, I'd sure love to get some laser hair removal or something like that, and they're going to be paying for it cash, but it's kind of surprising that patients with gender dysphoria will be getting unlimited cosmetics for free in, as Representative Bradley said, a situation where our state is looking into massive budget deficit to pay for all these expensive procedures.
Laureen,
Was
may I
there?
also, may I?
Oh yeah,
may
I
I
was
just
gonna. I was
add?
good. Yeah, go ahead, Brandy. I'll add about the. I
I'm
want to
so
ask about the
sorry.
financial piece of it.
Just what
Was
Dr.
there a
Travis just said.
reconciliation?
Yes, we add a safety clause when there's an issue of public safety. And so they have added a safety clause to this bill so that the people of Colorado cannot petition this bill, which means the people of Colorado have no say on what this bill does. And then our governor decided to sign this bill into law behind closed doors. So almost as if we live in a communist state. The people have no say on what their taxpayer dollars are going for. And we had a representative that has undergone cancer who is now going to have to pay for men to feel more like women when these procedures aren't even paid for by her own health insurance plan to help her with disfiguring scars. It's such a laughable joke of a bill. And when I went to the well and said, we are paying for this for minors, Representative Tatone said, this is not happening in our state. We're not putting 8-year-olds, 9-year-olds, 10-year-olds on puberty blockers, and we're not performing mastectomies on healthy children. They gaslight and they do things like this to try to hide the fact that we are performing child mutilation in our state. And it shouldn't be acceptable to anyone in the state of Colorado to allow this to continue to happen.
Yeah, and I might point out that a lot of them claim that it never happens, but boy, they won't let you therefore say this is only available for adults. They insist on forcing this into the law. And we're not talking about bills now. We're talking about laws that have been signed into effect. And one little element on the safety clause. Here's another reason they use it. It's really, I think, the biggest reason, and that is that way they can put the law in place immediately.
So it's kind of humorous, I think, as a doctor, that these are stat procedures. When, for example, like Representative Bradley said, we had a female doctor testify who had mastectomy for breast cancer at a young age. That some of these procedures that women feel like they medically need aren't always covered or difficult to get. But this is now going to be covered unlimited, basically cosmetics, if you can get a behavioral health specialist to say that you are suffering from gender dysphoria. So that's pretty extreme. And the idea that this isn't happening, like Senator Lundberg said, is crazy, because if you ever try to curtail it in just kids under 18, people get very angry. Any of your viewers can go to stoptheharmdatabase.com and see that in Colorado, there's 54 hospitals that have done these procedures and medicines to kids. And the activists that testify against us in these bills, against doctors in these bills, are proud to say that now I think they're at over 600 kids a month are coming to Colorado from other states where these things are banned, kids, in what they call, not me, the transcontinental pipeline. There's even a website, tcpipeline.org, the transcontinental pipeline, that they're basically shuttling or trafficking these kids from other states here to get these kind of procedures. So clearly this is going on, and they want it to go on, and it's openly advertised. And until you say it aloud, that's somehow, you're not supposed to say that, but it's openly advertised online.
Horrifying. Dr. Morrell, the next bill on our list is the Gender Identity Certificate of Death, House Bill 251109. we can, yeah, it's pretty, you coined the phrase, this does not allow misgendering dead people. That is how I describe this bill.
So HB 251109 got some coverage in the Daily Caller and Fox News because it originally threatened jail up to 120 days or a fine up to $750 that if a person like a funeral home director, coroner, or doctor put the sex of a person on the certificate of death, and if the say family, or there were documents extant that said that the patient identified as a different gender than their actual sex, then that person could be fined or put in jail. My understanding is, I've reread the text a couple times. It looks like they took that out, but keep in mind that's what they want. They want to jail or fine you for basically being a good scientist. So it's some people might wonder what the importance is of having good death certificate data, because most of us don't look at death certificates every day. I do have a public health degree, and in large scale studies, epidemiological studies, big studies that the CDC, NIH, WHO reference to look at diseases across the population, to check on the health of a nation, definitely they look at death certificates. And there's some things like not only heart attacks present differently and at different ages in men and women, but also it's going to be very confusing when prostate cancer decreases in men and increases suddenly in women in some states and not others. Like, it's going to be interesting to tease that data out. And it does matter because especially they say it's rare, but it's especially in the rare diseases where you're looking at small signals and trying to correlate that with maybe environmental things or other things going on in society, that's going to really potentially mess up some research. And I'll let maybe James Kerwin would have more to say about whether that's a free speech issue, but it is important to know that I talked to someone in this business today, and they definitely are already doing this, going off of a coroner or a funeral home director will be filling out their death certificate and change the sex based on what the family says or what the documents might say that this patient presented as a different sex or gender. So this is already going on, and it's not clear to me. Again, this also had the safety clause, which again, it doesn't seem like a public health emergency or anybody's dying. In fact, unfortunately, people are already dead when this kind of comes into play. But they did invoke the safety clause, which seems like an overreach to me. So they are already doing this. I understand there's a rumor, and when you read the bill, it's not clear whether they might add a second separate box. So there'll be like a gender box and a sex box, as if those two things were different. I will tell you again, number one, they're already doing it. They're already changing the sex on death certificates. And number two, you have to remember that the people that want this bill through, that want coroners and funeral home directors to write down something different than the dead cold body line in front of them on the certificate, they are not going to be satisfied with the gender that they want and not the sex that they want. That's not going to be something that's going to satisfy them. So I can easily predict that if there is somebody uncomfortable doing this, a funeral home director or something uncomfortable doing this, I am sure that they'll be coerced into changing it, because that's the whole point of the bill, and that's really the desire. And some of the important part of this, people have to remember, all these bills, they're already taking away kids from parents who disagree on these issues. Okay. That's been in the news multiple times, and we all know multiple people this is going on. So these bills, even if they don't do a whole lot, which I would argue they do, their real intent is to give cover and to show people that they're just going to go further and further. And so I think it's important to remember the intent of the bill actually matters just as much as the effect.
I'm happy to jump in. I think that's a very good point, that even if the bill does have a provision that says the Department of Health is supposed to add an additional field to the death certificate data collection system that asks for gender, which presumably means, and they will still keep sex. The law doesn't say that, so it's possible they'll add the gender field and delete the sex field, and then that'll have the same outcome as if they just said you have to record as the sex, the gender. But in any event, it's a little unclear exactly as to what the law, when it's fully implemented, which that change is not due until January 2026. But we'll see what happens.
Well, there's another curious part to this bill too, and it actually follows a change they made a few years ago to birth certificates, where a birth certificate, an individual can have their or their child's birth certificate changed in its gender, and they put a special provision in the law that said if the birth certificate is so amended, it cannot indicate on the certificate that it had been amended. It's to look like the original. And with this bill, which is now law, they added to that section of the law so that it applies to both birth certificates and death certificates. They can't indicate that there was any amendment or any change made. So, yeah, the intent is very clear, even though the application is still kind of fuzzy.
And
I think that let's just to take the scenario where the intent is carried out. I think we'll agree on what the intent is. There potentially could be First Amendment issues probably not for government employees to the extent any of them. I'm not sure how the system works, but if there are state employees who fill out death certificates, they may not have a claim because they will be deemed to be speaking on behalf of the government. But if there are private parties, as I understand it, funeral home directors maybe have to do this, and they're private, they potentially have an argument. There's a further potential issue which is broader than the First Amendment free speech interest, and that's this. And this is a fairly aggressive legal theory, but this is the kind of scenario where it might actually make sense. There is a prohibition in the federal constitution against a state establishing a religion. And if I've ever seen a legislative enactment that is not justified by any apparent rationality, and that seems only to be trying to advance some sort of mystical beliefs, in this case about gender identity, this is it. Because for one thing, who benefits from this? It's somebody who's dead. In fact, California has the same law, and they call it the Respect After Death law, which just in the title tells you something like, well, does the government have an interest in preserving the respect for dead people? I'm not sure. In any event, I will just raise that as a possibility. If this law, is fully implemented in the way that it might be, we at Mountain States Legal Foundation anyway would certainly be willing to talk to people that might be interested in challenging.
And Laureen, Mr. Kerwin brings up how kind of unjustified this bill is. And I think it's very interesting if you read this bill, what this bill actually describes you're supposed to do. So imagine you're a funeral home director and you see this body in front of you, and it is a guy, a man. And so you write, M on the death certificate. But then say somebody calls you up and says, hey, I knew this person and they were actually a woman. Okay, so now you need to try to find any documents. And so if you get a document and it says, oh, yeah, he says he's a woman, fine, you got to change it. But what if there's a couple documents? And so you might have 5 or 10 different documents. Well, you need to use the most recent one. But then what if some family members say, no, he was a guy, and some family says, no, it's a woman? Then you literally, and I'm not making this up, have to take a vote. You have to count the people and take a vote. So I've had people die in my own family. I'm not trying to make light of this, but it is kind of a darkly awkward situation that you might be taking a vote on the person's sex when the whole time the funeral home director has your body on a panel in his office, and he knows what gender you are. It's kind of ludicrous. I wouldn't even say religious, just straight up ludicrous. But anyway, thank you, James. Good insight.
Lorraine, if I could jump in for a moment here, when you introduced FAIR and what FAIR stands for, I think you used the term objective truth. This flies in the face of any objective reality, and it's very obvious. And I was just reading today a serious article about a lot of college officials who are trying to figure out how to get around the federal requirement now for banning men and women's sports. And they were literally throwing around the concept of maybe we can create a church that adheres to this new ideology, so we as a college can incorporate our trans students in their chosen, athletic competition. Again, totally nuts, but this has become serious discussion apparently in some circles of higher ed, and this really was a serious article. It wasn't a satire, wasn't the Babylon Bee.
Well, and Dr. Morrell, we go up to the well and we argue with these prime sponsors of these bills, and we ask for clarification. If you have family members in disagreement, or let's say they're in a different state and they have identification that says one thing and they're brought back to Colorado, and there's some sort of a disagreement, and the co-prime sponsors will literally look at you and not respond to the question whatsoever. So you're just left dumbfounded. But when one of the co-prime bill sponsors thinks that your baby in the second trimester in your womb can pick their gender, that's what you're playing with in the Colorado legislation. So
I am really unhappy with Representative Bradley because I wanted to say that. That was the funniest, dumbest thing I've ever seen in maybe my life. And I'm going to say it was Representative Karen McCormick, and this isn't libel or slander, whichever that would be, because there's literally video. I'll repost it today on my Twitter, that she said sex develops in the first trimester, which it's definitely determined at conception, and then a gender identity in the second trimester of pregnancy, like some little fetus, little babies floating around like thinking about this. It's just the most dumb thing ever. I'm sorry. Thank you, Representative Bradley.
Well, that is a really appropriate note to end on in discussing this bill and discussing our whole suite of gender-related bills that have become law in Colorado. We just have a few more bills to touch on. Brandy, I'm going to punt this back to you. One of them is the Library Resource Decision Standards for Public Schools, Senate Bill 063. And from my perspective, to me, this is another example of the Colorado government usurping parental rights.
Well, yes, Laureen. I mean, it's just another bill with no guardrails, no real decision making. What are the standards? It's going to be library boards that make a decision with no real standard or code or anything. So if you have a liberal library board, they're going to get rid of conservative books. If you have conservative library boards, they're going to get rid of liberal books, and the parents are going to get left out. I mean, this is what's happening in the Colorado legislative body. Parents have got to wake up, and they've got to join forces with people like FAIR. I wish I could give you more on these bills, but this is our fourth bill and our third bill we're discussing tonight. And again, no guardrails, plenty of loopholes, and nothing to make Colorado a better state. So,
well, and in the bill summary that we have posted in the chat, we list lobbyists in support, and this is always kind of interesting as we were putting together this table and seeing how the lobbyists, very common names kept popping up, like the Colorado Education Association, which is the teachers union, were in support of this library resource bill. The ACLU of Colorado was in support. The AFT of Colorado, another teachers union. Denver Public Schools, Jefferson County Schools. So it's just interesting to see who the lobbyists are, and also the bill sponsors. The sponsor, one of the sponsors of this bill, is Daphne Michelson Janae, and she was the same sponsor who put in place back in 2019 a bill that grants minors over the age of 12 to manage their own mental health care. She was also the sponsor behind a bill last session that allowed non-legal name changes in schools and makes it a discriminatory act for teachers to misname a student. So it's, again, just these are all, I think, important context setting data points to consider as we're talking through these.
Let me point out that this subject on what books should be in, this is, we're not talking about libraries in general, we're talking about public school libraries. And the books that are generally targeted in this are books that, and Brandy, I'd love to ask the question of you. Did anybody try reading from these books, and were they gavelled down because it was too inappropriate to even read the words from these books, that they've made it now very, very difficult to remove from the schools? You know, there are cases all over the country where somebody gets up at a school board meeting and starts reading from the book, and the school board is just aghast at what's being said, but not that it's in their library, but that they're allowing a parent to read it to the Board of Education.
Well, that was, yes, that was last session, right? But this session, when I have a Democrat on my bill that wants to get rid of adult content on kids' Chromebooks, it's censorship by the Library Association, but this is not censorship. So, you know, Dawn Fritz with the CEA came to testify, I think, on the last bill we just talked about, and she certainly came to testify on 1312 and 1309. So she has no idea what the First Amendment is. She wouldn't understand a constitution if it hit her upside the head, you know, so she probably should stay in her lane. And I've told her that many times. So, and by the way, Laureen, Jefferson County should too. Maybe they should stop hiring groomers, and maybe, you know, if they could take a week off from one of their teachers being brought up on pedophile charges, maybe they could actually be accountable for having good teachers. So,
yes, yeah. If you live in Colorado, you know Jefferson County schools are a hot mess right now. Okay, the last bill we have on our list, it actually did not get signed into law, but we wanted to bring it forward because, Brandy, you think that this one will be reintroduced next session. And this one is called the Youth Service Organization Engagement on School Campuses. Oh, Kevin, you know about this one too.
Yeah. Yes, I remember having a very exercise discussion with one of our state senators over that one. What are the numbers on it?
It's SB 25284.
284. Okay, yeah.
So, Brandy, what are your
so this
concerns
bill
with
was
this one?
brought forward. It was brought forward by the YMCA and the Boy Scouts of America to bring these groups onto campuses, which they can already come on to campuses. In the bill, it talks about activism. And so the concern there is Planned Parenthood coming onto school campuses, other forms of activism. That's not youth sports or youth, you know, types of things. And the concern would be an Aaron Lee type of thing, right? Your kids are signed up for art club, and instead of going to an art club, it's a gay sex alliance club. And, you know, I had a specific example, Laureen, where you and I talked. I went to my kid's school, and there's a gaming club, and I took a screenshot of it. And I think you and I both went down the rabbit hole. It was a 41-year-old man trying to get kids together to do some type of gaming club. So, you know, it opens up a whole rabbit hole of a mess of activism and other things that shouldn't be a part of what we're trying to do to protect our children.
Right, and it forced, or it would have forced, and may force if it becomes law later, every school, including charter schools, if I recall correctly, this bill intentionally said charter schools are a part of this requirement.
That was correct, Kevin.
A policy, yeah, they'd set up a policy on accepting organizations, and it would force the schools to allow a wide range of groups to come in, and I don't think anybody's talking about the Boy Scouts. Except you're right, they were the ones that claimed somehow they didn't have access to schools, so they needed to schools needed to be forced to include them. But every group is forced to would be included in that as well. And it's none of this. Here's one thing: if you read the Colorado Constitution, this local school board is really in charge of how the schools are to be conducted, and the curriculum that's to be selected, and for the legislature to step in and dictate rules like this, like with the library bill we just discussed. It's not their role. The legislature needs to stay in their lane as well. And yeah, they have the plenary power to override these things, but when the Colorado Constitution says school boards are the ultimate or to be the real guiding force for their schools, it's just completely wrong for the legislature to run roughshod over them.
Well, and I'll say one other thing, Laureen. I mean, it has to tell people something, for the people listening in that aren't from Colorado. You have a Democrat governor that has vetoed 11 bills from this last session. If that tells you how rogue some of our legislators are in our state house, our own governor has vetoed 11 bills already. So,
well, I know with the last hour, we've painted what might be a grim picture of happenings in Colorado. But we do want to end on we're not done yet, but we will start on a more positive note. And that will be that I'd love Brandy, for you, and Dr. Morell, and Kevin as well. Speak to how civic engagement has changed in just the last year, maybe 2 years. Brandy, do you want to start that discussion?
I would love to. I think that, over the talks, it used to be a couple people showing up to testify on bills. Like Kevin said, on House Bill 1312, we had over 700 people show up. And I would say the majority were against that bill. I've had people from all walks of life send me emails. As a Christian conservative, I have the majority probably from liberal progressives, agnostic, atheist, really bridging the gap, that just want to change in their state. I mean, they don't want to maybe move to the right, but they want some sort of central type of ideology. And just the engagement of that, I had one lady reach out to me that has brought change to Colorado Department of Public Health. I had somebody reach out to me about something that happened with Colorado Parks and Wildlife. I was on the phone with their lobbyist today, and they're going to issue probably an apology tomorrow. So the engagement is there. People are really looking out for what's happening in the state of Colorado, and they want to change. They want Colorado to be more affordable. They want public safety to be better. They want parental rights to be restored. And so I think the engagement has gone up so much more than when I first started 3 years ago. And they want their state back. They don't recognize their state. And this, again, is coming from Democrats, unaffiliated, and Republicans. And I just have so much hope for our state. I think we're tip of the spear. And I think that there's a lot of people wanting to work together to really bring that change forward. And I think with these ballot initiatives that Kevin will talk to you about, I think that there's a focus on keeping our kids safe. I'm working with Representative Regina English, who's a Democrat who wants to fight for change to bring people to justice who rape kids in our state, who traffic kids in our state. And there's a lot more that we can join forces to do that. And I just see a real change, and I'm very hopeful. Or listen, I would get my 4 kids out of the state if I wasn't hopeful. And with people like Dr. Morell and Aaron Lee and FAIR and Colorado Parent Advocacy Network and all the people fighting to make a change, I see real hope coming for our state. And this is the most hopeful I've been in probably 10 years for our state. So I think there's a real optimism coming, and I hope that the people listening hear me on that.
I agree with Representative Bradley. I've seen her standing strong for years, and Laureen, you and Fair, Senator Lundberg, and Protect Kids Colorado, and Aaron Lee, who's not here, who's with that group. I know a lot of people have been leading in this. People like and people behind the scenes and in front of the scenes have been leading in this, and just really taking a lot of hits. But I've noticed from last year, when I think there was like one doctor that testified on our side on things, and this year where there was a bunch. I mean, we had one time we had 10 doctors come, not to mention some really awesome Mia Hughes and some other well-known journalists and people. And people are putting their name on it now, so they're not afraid anymore. And so that's just really changed, and people are getting connected. Protect Kids Colorado and some of the other groups are getting really connected and influential, and that's really changed. And so I think what's really changing is people don't really realize this stuff is happening because it sounds ludicrous. Like, why would they pass a bill that said unlimited cosmetics, but only if you said you were born in the wrong body? Like, I'm feeling like maybe like my scalp is not in the right body that I was born with and I need some hair transplant. Like, I don't know, like it just sounds ludicrous, but that's actually the law that we have here. And so when people start hearing about this and when their kids get involved, I have some, like Bradley saying, I have some lifelong atheists, never talked to Republican, far left, East Coast people in my group that when stuff started involving their kids, that was over. And so I think we can all do something by, inviting their friend to a fair webinar like this, or, sharing Laureen's recent piece or something, or sharing a recent news article, just asking what they think about this. Cause just read the bill and most people are going to think it's crazy. And then I think getting connected with with these groups, because people want to be responsible. People want to take responsibility for their government, which is how our country's set up. And we kind of need to, because if we just go home, we want to just grill and chill. Basically, the people that really want to do these crazy things are just going to have a field day and go. And I want people to remember, if they remember one thing I said, it's just, at some of these bills, the representatives that were passing these laws said, this is just the beginning. We're going to come back next year with more, right? We're all like, this is the worst. I can't believe it. We're the worst state. No. This is just the beginning, unless we want to stand up and change it. And that is going on. So I'd invite people to connect with, any one of these groups here.
Great.
Yeah, if I could jump in now and tell you that from Brandy talked about the last 3 years while she was in the legislature. Well, for the last 23 years, since I became a part of the legislature, I've seen a couple of things occur. One is I haven't seen the people in general change too much, but I have seen the politics change a great deal, and I addressed that much earlier in this in this session here. But the thing I have seen change is people have become more aware of what's happening. 1312 is a perfect example. I'd never seen 700 people, not just to come to a hearing, but to sign up to speak. That is just beyond belief, and it's because people care so deeply about what they see happening. And it does seem to be coalescing around how parents are treated by the government. And I'm very encouraged, and that's why I'm a part of. Travis mentioned this Protect Kids Colorado, which is an organization that I and several others are standing up right now, and we're working on 3 initiatives that are another way to make law in Colorado. If you read Article 5, Section 1, which is Article 5 in the Colorado Constitution, sets up the legislature. But in Section 1, it says, "We the people reserve the right to make laws independent of the legislature." And I'm seeing this happen more and more and more. And it's because of an irresponsible legislative leadership that's out of touch with the people of Colorado. And I sincerely believe and know that the people of Colorado are starting to figure this out and are starting to pull the reins back. But that doesn't mean it's clear sailing ahead. No, it means there's a lot of work to be done, but there are a lot of folks to join in and to help. And I should give the connecting point with Protect Kids Colorado, and that's protectkidscolorado.org. check that out, and I think you'll find a place you can meaningfully make a difference right here and right now. These initiatives, we're in the stage of getting the petitions printed right now, so we'll be distributing these in just a couple of weeks from about this time, maybe 3 weeks. It schedules, getting everything organized.
Right. And I did just put in the chat a bunch of links to groups in Colorado that are committed to defending our liberties, including FAIR and Protect Kids Colorado, coloradoparents.org, which is also known as CPAN. I also want to point out too that we have just a few honest, fair media outlets. Not many, but one is the Denver Gazette that would require a paid subscription, and a newer one that is free is RockyMountainVoice.com.
Right.
And the Rocky Mountain Voice was started by Heidi Ganahl, who was the candidate for governor, the GOP candidate for governor a couple of years ago. And when she was on the campaign trail, what she kept hearing from our communities was that they didn't know what the heck was going on in Colorado because they couldn't trust the media. So she vowed and promised to change that. So that's another great outlet to start getting your news.
Those are excellent resources.
All right, so we are in good shape time-wise. We have plenty of time for questions. If anybody wants to put their questions in the chat. Let's see if we've got anything. I know, Brandy. So there was a reference to the probability that the legislature is just getting started. So what are you bracing for this next legislative session?
That's the $1 million question, right? When you're out of money, there's not too much you can brace for, I feel like. So I hope that we continue to be out of money. To tell you the truth, I pray that we continue to be out of money. I mean, with them passing bills like they continue to pass, I can only think that President Trump is going to start stripping federal funding. And so if he does that, then they're going to really have to start fighting each other on their pet projects. I think next year will be even worse because they're going to have to try to find dollars even harder than they had to this year.
Interesting.
Yeah, next year's an election year, and the legislature acts a lot differently when they're facing an election. So it will be rather fascinating. And this is one of the reasons I think these initiatives we're running. One is preventing men and women's sports. Another one is dealing with the mutilating surgeries of kids. And another one is just straight up the issue of sex trafficking children. We get these on the ballot, and we're going to change the conversation around the election time. And the legislature is well aware of the impact of what they do on who votes for whom. So yeah, sit tight. And Brandy, I'll give you a little bit of counsel in this respect. When I started back in 2003, that there was a recession on, and I thought, just like you're saying, well, good, we're going to have to cut back on the programs. Not so fast. They're going to be very, very shrewd and creative in sustaining everything, hoping they will find better ways, and they're going to add fees to the citizens like nobody's business, because here in Colorado, you've got to get a vote of the people to raise the tax, but you just call it a fee and it's free for the legislature.
For those of you who are watching this on live stream, you can put some questions into the comments section. Just wanted to make sure you all were aware of that. So, James, I have a question for you. How feasible is it for people, for the average everyday citizen, to sue the government if they believe that they have a First Amendment right violation?
Interesting question.
That seems just like such a big barrier.
Well, the biggest barrier would probably be the cost of legal counsel, unfortunately. So, my firm, Mountain States Legal Foundation, is a pro bono public interest group, and we represent, libertarian and left and right leaning clients mostly, though not exclusively. And our brief is to advance liberty wherever we can, but we do everything for free. So if you are lucky enough to find an outfit like ours, that's one way you can do it. Another barrier I would say is this: there are some long-standing legal barriers to suing government employees for damages, which are legal doctrines, right? There's basically, unfortunately, there's been baked in to the chief law that people use to sue state and local governments, basically a thumb on the scale and in favor of the government actors as against the plaintiffs for 50 years. That's a long-term thing that we at Mountain States Legal Foundation are seeking to overturn, because that would make it easier as a legal matter to win your case when you have found your attorney to represent you. But yeah, hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, thank you. Yes, it does. It is possible, but it's you've got to find the right support for sure. Do any of our other panelists have any questions? Any comments? I don't see that we have any questions in the queue.
Let me throw one thing out, because I've tracked all the bills when I was in the legislature and since then as well, and I publish a weekly newsletter that's available on my website, kevinlundberg.com. And when the legislative session begins, I plow right in and I try to identify the really good bills and the really bad bills, and then I track them through the process. And actually, this last year, I came up with a couple of other categories. One was woke bills, and I forget the terminology I used on the other, but you run across some things that are just bizarre. But I believe that's a good resource, particularly during the session. But every week, I'll put some things down that I think are important for people here in Colorado to pay attention to, and it's always difficult for myself. This is how I got started on it. Is at the end of the session, I, as a legislator, would look back and say, I know we did a lot, but I kind of think I forgot a half of it, or it's 9/10 of it. But if I write it down and I create a running narrative on the whole thing, then it really helps make sense out of it, and you can figure out what are the good ones, what are the bad ones. And from my perspective, 80% of the 90% of the I think it was 90% of the good bills failed, and about the same percentage, it was 80%, and 80% of the bad bills passed. So what do you think they're doing down there? Check it out though, kevinlundberg.com. Click on Lundberg Report. It's right there, free for all. And if you want to see last year's session, just scroll down to the May 10th edition.
I reference that every week. Thank you for everything you're doing, Kevin. Well, I do appreciate everyone's the optimism. We are going to get there. We are going to get our state back. We've got our Constitution supporting us, and we should just continue to defend it. And the easiest way for people to do that will be to stay up to date, stay up to speed, stay connected. And I hope that's really the objective of this call, is to not only inform and educate everybody about what is transpiring in Colorado, but also help you all get connected with one another.
Think of it this way. You've heard of Make America Great Again. Well, I'd like to make Colorado again.
Thank you, Laureen, for all that you do. I've known you for quite a while, and I appreciate all your op-eds and all the important work that you do for our state too. So thank you for putting this call together, and thank you for all the great work you do for our state.
Amen.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Thank you to everybody who gave an hour plus of your time tonight. We really appreciate it.